Glory to Rome is known as one of the granddaddies of multi-use card play, which means that a single card can be used as a resource, a building, an action, or just straight up victory points. The problem is, the game is as old as shit. And sometimes games, they just don't age very well, despite how fondly we look back at them. The sad reality is, not all games can stand the test of time. Despite Glory to Rome being a very popular game within hardcore gaming circles, it's not a game a lot of people new to the hobby talk about, and for a very good reason. You can't buy it. Now, I won't go into the dramatic details as to why, but basically, it will never be produced again, due to the crazy licensing issues surrounding it. But don't click away just yet. I decided to make my own copy of the game and design my own cards. It's a project I've always wanted to do because I really love this game, and so I wanted to make something that appeals to my taste, I guess. Now, each of these cards are based on the original game. I wanted my copy to be a bit more colorful, a bit more thematic, and just generally more approachable to new players. And I want you to be able to play too. So what I've done is I've gone ahead and I've put all the files that I've created, put them online, and then I put the link in the description so you can download them and print them off yourself. In Glory to Rome, each player uses the cards in his hand in one of 4 different ways. Each card can represent a client, a resource, a building, or just straight up victory points. During the game, players use each of these 4 parts of the card to construct their part of the city and try to collect the most influence. Each turn, a player chooses one of the 6 different roles to play to further their goals, and then the other players can choose to follow if they have the same card type available. At the end of the game, the player with the most influence is the winner. So Glory to Rome, in my eyes, is the king of multi-use card play and the lead-follow mechanic. The multi-use card play in Glory to Rome, while incredibly overwhelming to a new player, provides an abundance of strategy to those willing to invest some time in learning the game and what the cards are that are available. Take role selection, okay? On your turn, you have to select a card from your hand, and that card will be the action you'll be able to perform for the round. Deciding what role is really tough because you have to discard the card, and the cool thing is that everyone around the table can choose to follow that action if they discard a card of the same role. So even if it's not your turn, you're making that same difficult strategic decision. Plus, because it has a lead follow mechanic, it always feels like it's your turn, meaning there is absolutely no downtime in this game. What's even more brain-burning is that when you discard a card, it goes straight to a shared pool that anyone can freely use with some actions, which creates another tough choice, because now I'm looking over at Kim and wondering if this card I'm using for the roll or discarding is just going to be useful to her because she might need the building to synergize with her current tableau. Because buildings are a big part of the game, and what's interesting is that you're not going to be able to build a ton of them in a given game. So now you need to think even deeper on what buildings you're going to build and what's going to provide the best strategy for the game. And what's cool is that each building is so powerful and unique that you're going to have tons of these moments where everybody's going to be looking at each other and looking at what they're building and saying like, that's overpowered. And they're going to be pointing to you and doing the exact same thing. And hell, maybe you shouldn't even turn that card into a building at all. Maybe you should toss it into your stockpile to use as a materials for a different building. Because each building requires a particular material type to be completed, and you use either the cards from your hand or the cards in your stockpile to complete that building. But maybe you shouldn't be using the cards in your stockpile as materials. Maybe your best bet is if you use it for straight up victory points. When you play the merchant role, you're able to move the cards from your stockpile into your vault, which give you victory points. Now, I hope after all that, you can see exactly what I mean when I talk about multi-use card play and how overwhelming the strategy can become with just a single card. This is a game built for me and my tastes. I love that feeling like I'm drowning in options on every single turn. And you know what? As to the game's lasting power and whether or not it can compete with most, contemporary board games, it's just so refreshing to play an older game where the mechanics and gameplay they're just so pure. It sounds strange, but it's what I mean is it's not a hodgepodge of different mechanics that seems to dominate most contemporary board game design. I love lots of new games, but at a certain point, it's starting to feel like the designers are these wacky Frankenstein stitching together these cardboard monstrosities of varying mechanics. But here, because the game is so tightly focused, there is room to really explore the mechanic it does use into more depth than most other games. And thankfully, the deck is so freakishly massive that you'll never feel like you're playing the same game twice. Variability in this game is awesome. I still have fun to this day trying to figure out what new synergies I can get from my buildings. And for a tableau builder, there is a ton of interaction. Aside from the fact that you're always paying attention to what other people are building and playing, the cards themselves can directly impact other players. Take my favorite card, the Prison, for example. The Prison lets you lock away someone's building to use it for yourself. But to those faint-hearted, goody two-shoe type gamers, don't worry, the person on the receiving end gets the victory points for the completed building as compensation. But maybe you're not that nice and you want some interaction that's a little meaner. For the Legionary action, you get to announce a card type that you have in your hand, and if anyone around the table has one of those cards, they have to give it to you. So now you have this sort of hilarious mini game that occurs, that's basically like a mind game, where you're trying to do your best to figure out what cards people have in your hand. Now, of course, it also helps that you might have just seen them pick that card up. I love when a game was able to encourage players to truly be engaged in other players' turns, and I think that mechanic does just that. Okay, but I can't keep gushing. I have to be a bit more critical. Player count has always been an issue with this game for me. It's unfortunate that the game requires 3 or 4 players and doesn't play 2 players very well, I don't find. I've tried various suggestions online as to how it can play better with 2, but none really seem to work. Also, it can get a little irritating when you're playing if people are calling out the rolls and you don't have any of those cards in your hand to follow. Like any card game, luck of the draw can be a blessing and it can be a curse. Thankfully, you can play with the variant that allows you to discard 2 cards the same type to follow. But if you dislike how card games can be slightly random due to the draw, you wouldn't be watching a video about a card game. The other thing I'm not a big fan of is the pacing that sometimes goes on in this game. It can sometimes feel a little clumsy. The game starts off at this sort of crawl where it feels like you can't really do anything from the start. And then all of a sudden, it becomes this insane sprint where you're comboing like a madman and performing an action 4 times on your turn because you have a bunch of patrons for the role in the tableau. Because basically in the game, if you lead or follow any action, you can perform more of those actions on your turn based on how many patron cards you have of that role in your clientele. So it can get a little nuts sometimes. So has Glory to Rome stood the test of time? Of course it has, or I wouldn't have bothered going through the trouble of making my own design. This game has held up beautifully and easily stands toe-to-toe with every modern board game, popping up endlessly on Kickstarter. Glory to Rome gets a solid 9 from me. I think it's one of those true classics. The fact that it's out of print is a big reason why I'm not sure a lot of new gamers will have ever heard of this game. And that's a damn shame. But, like I said at the beginning, all the files for this custom version are available in the description. So please print them off and enjoy them and do whatever you want with them. Thanks for watching, everyone. I was gonna send you off with the Roman salute, but I don't think it looks very good on camera. So I'll just wave goodbye instead. Bye, guys.